second. Has that, did we start recording? Did you guys get
Yep.
that? Okay, awesome.
Yep.
Perfect.
Thank you. So today I've laid out to talk about is I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about our Foundation for Aging, where we are, where we come from, the kind of joke that's not so funny that we a lot in philanthropy. One foundation. So unfortunately, we all do operate very differently, but hopefully we'll go over some like pointers and things that you might want to look for and inquire about if working with other foundations. I am going to go over our granting cycle and how to apply for a grant similarly. Hopefully it'll raise ideas and thoughts when you're working with either RRF or other fund foundation. And then I'll talk a little bit about our perspective on our priority area of social intergenerational connectedness and share a little bit about what we fund and what we're excited. So on the next slide, it just gets into this just a little bit of who we are. Those of you who have been in the field for a while might know us as Retirement Research Foundation. I think it was 2019, we are named to RRF Foundation for Aging. We didn't want to get rid of the RRF, but also recognize that the foundation, we got a lot of inquiries specific to retirement, specific to research that we wasn't our focus areas. And we have been in existence now for over 45 years. And you could go to the next slide. Ever since our beginning, we have been ever since we were started, we've been kind of super narrowly cued in on issues related to people over the age of 60. So all about aging. And we kind of started out as all things to all people aging. When we started 45 years ago, we were one of the only foundations focused on older adults. Since then, fortunately, there have been a few more foundations joining in the space. There are, I think, now 6 other foundations that only focus on aging and older adults, but a lot more foundations that focus on aging as well as other priority areas. So back in 2020, we were able to narrow in, and our trustee decided to really want to have impact in these 4 specific areas. So the 4 areas that we now focus on are, you could see here, caregiving, economic security in later life, housing, and social and intergenerational connectedness. And on the next slide, it tells you a little bit about how we go about our funding in this space. So we like to say we have an integrated approach to grant making. And on top of all of our priority areas are our mission, vision, and values, which as a foundation, we really hold tight to. I've worked for a number of organizations that have those mission and values, necessarily refer to them. Actually, at all of board meetings, we have little note cards on the table that bring us back. We have the goals of our strategic plan in front of us so we could be reminded of them and really try to be full of them in our approach to our work. Then underneath our mission, vision, and values, we have our 4 priority areas that I just mentioned, followed by our 4 or 5 pathways. The pathways are really the types of grants that we provide. So we give grants for organizations doing advocacy. We do grants for organizations doing direct service. Direct service is limited to Illinois. We do grants for professional education and training. We do grants for research. And we do organizational capacity building, also only in Illinois. Sometimes we are able to expand outside our geographic region, but generally that will be for projects that are very focused and generalizable to the country as a whole. So I'm going to talk mostly about our work in the area of research today. If you do have any questions, though, feel free to ask on any of them. So this slide here, I did want to get into, just share with you our goals and the values that we work with, as I do think they, like I said, we look at them on a regular basis and we try to make sure that we're incorporating into all of our funding decisions. So we've outlined these 5 goals, and I'm just going to read through them. They are to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, to identify and support work that has the potential for high impact. As we go through, I'm going to tell you that a little more about how we see impact, because I know that's one of those kind of elusive terms that what does that mean? How do we are getting that? So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We want to grow and strengthen our own communications. This is something that a couple years ago, we did a survey just to understand how people perceive us. And one of the biggest things that we found out was we were like the best kept secret. Nobody knew about us. So we want to make sure that people are aware of our interests, of where we want to fund, and of the areas that we're really looking to make an impact in. We want to incorporate best practice, new forms of philanthropy, which I think has been very exciting as someone who works in philanthropy. We're really interested in kind of the new lingo around trust-based philanthropy and how do we work with our partners to have open and honest conversations where there's trust on both sides of the party. How do we work at things like amplified grant making? As a foundation, we've never done general operating support, but that really is a best practice, right? That's the best help nonprofit organizations really, its goal is by allowing them to do what they do best when they want to do it. So really starting to explore some of those spaces and to figure out how we could expand our funding to move into those directions. And then our 5th goal is to reduce ageism. And then similarly, and you could see for yourself, I'll go quickly, but these are kind of the that we live by every day at our Foundation for Aging. Age inclusivity, collaboration, connection, equity, growth, impact, innovation, knowledge sharing, transparency, and voice. So that's kind of the background of us and who we are. I should mention, we do not do fundraising. We're based on funds from John MacArthur. He started the MacArthur Foundation and had some funds remaining and put those into a pot. He was retiring, so he called it the Retirement Research Foundation, and that's how we got our start. Okay, so this is getting into how to go about applying for a grant. So I'm just going to run through all of these steps are on our website. If you are interested in applying to us, if you go to our website, rrf.org, and click on apply for, click in any of our pathways, and all the way at the bottom of the screen, you'll find these steps. Thank you for posting the site. And then if you click on the arrows, you could go to, through the steps, and the website should really walk you through the process. It is quite a process. You do want to gauge your eligibility. That's something that a lot of people don't do, and it wastes your time. It wastes our time when you submit a letter of inquiry for a proposal that just isn't eligible, whether it's based on geography. We don't fund research and development. We fund applied research, not research and development. So the eligibility is listed there. Be sure to read through that. We have all the information about our application class. We recently, a couple of years ago, went to an invite, non-invite letter of inquiry process.
Hey, Lizette, it's Kathy. Quick question.
Oh, did you have a question? Yeah. Okay, so we used to have, not have an invite, non-invite LOI process, and then we were able to encourage or discourage LOIs, and we just found that that was really making for a lot of extra work on our partners' ends and on our ends by having to review applications and having to submit applications that really weren't in line with what we were wanting to fund. So at this point, we're still funding the same amount of work that we were in the past, but we're receiving fewer applications, and then of the applications we're receiving, we're funding more of them. However, even if you are invited to submit a proposal from your letter of inquiry, that does not mean you will be invited, or that does not mean your grant will be funded. We're still funding about 50% of those, which means 50% of people who do write full applications are still not being funded. And that level varies between research and direct service, so between our pathways. Research is really the most competitive pathway for us. So we have the lowest approval rating in our research pathway. If you are invited to submit a full application, you will get access to our portal to submit in with all of the information there. If you hop to the next slide, I'm going to tell you about what's in the application. But first, I know specifically you guys had asked about RRF's grant calendar. So I wanted to bring that up for you. So we have letters of inquiry open 3 times a year. And again, you cannot submit a proposal without being invited to from the letter of inquiry. Once you submit your letter of inquiry, we try to respond within 4 weeks. And it's kind of it's not a set deadline. Sometimes you'll hear earlier, sometimes you'll hear a little later. We try as hard as we can to respond within 4 weeks. And then you'll get some guidance, you'll get some feedback, as well as a link to the portal to submit your full proposal. And then once you submit a letter of inquiry, you have a full year to submit a proposal. We do have deadlines, but you're certainly welcome to submit at any time. But we kind of collect a group of them and then move them forward to our trustees. And let me tell you just a little bit about our process. So what happens is you submit your full proposal. That goes to me and my colleagues as program officers. We kind of dig into everything that you submit, look through it to see if there's anything missing. We kind of look proactively to see if there are questions that we think our trustees will raise. So our trustees, who are our board of directors, they make all of our funding decisions. So basically, our work then is to advocate for the proposals that we have. So I get a proposal and I read through it. I usually reach out to the research team or the applicants to go over any questions. I also often like to hear the proposal from their words. I feel like I could get a much better sense of what they're doing listening to people as opposed to reading what's on the page. We work really hard not to not provide funding due to poorly written proposals, because we know every community has a different level of staff and different, they're focusing on one thing and maybe proposal writing isn't it at the time. So we try to work with applicants to really understand what's going on and what they're trying to get funding for. And then we pull together all of the materials that you submitted along with any additional information. We send it off to our trustees, who then vote on it and they ask questions. And then we come to our board meeting. So our board meeting occurs in these months where the funding decisions are, May, August, and November, where we have opportunities to discuss with our trustees all of the proposals that were submitted, and then they vote and decisions are made. The one other thing, though, that I'll mention is, in addition to the work the program officers do in reviewing the materials, we often send proposals out for external review. I believe some of you on the call have been external reviewers for us. And so we want to get opinions beyond our own, and so generally we'll send it out. Sometimes we'll ask specific feedback if there are sections that we internally don't have expertise in. Sometimes we're just looking for a couple of general reviews on the work. Next slide. Okay, and this is the components of the application. And again, this is the kinds of things that we offer at our Foundation for Aging. I think it's pretty standard among foundations, but these are the things that you could kind of have in your mind, think through of for other foundations as well. So the proposal narrative is kind of the meat of the proposal. That's what a lot of people think of when they're thinking through the application. In the box on the right is all of the elements that we're usually looking for in a research proposal. It doesn't have to stick exactly to that. If you want to call it something else, you could call it something else. But those are the types of things that we as staff and reviewers are generally looking to see in order to understand what's going on within the work being described. And also for each of our pathways, we kind of have different information that we're looking for in the proposal. Nancy, did you have a question? Okay. So that's just a overview. We want to hear a little bit about the applicant organization, the significance. Again, the more information that you give us in the proposal, the less we're going to be reaching out to and asking follow-up questions on. And then also, we don't have a page limit on our proposals, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. Not that we're looking for long, lengthy proposals, but if there's something that you're debating, do I put it in, do I not put it in? I always think it's better to include it. So we're really looking for understanding of methods. How is a program going to be implemented? How is it going to, how is recruitment going to happen? If it is a direct service project, how are you going to find the people to come? One of the common sayings of our trustees is they're often saying, if you build it, it doesn't mean they're going to come. So they want to see, how do we know, is this going to be used? So as much justification as you could provide is always helpful. In addition to the narrative, our trustees like to read the executive summaries. They will look at the line item budget and the budget narrative, as well as the timeline, then additional documentation. Moving along with best practices, we're trying to reduce some of these as much as possible where we can. Some of it is more kind of legal work. I will say all of our trustees do often look at the financial audit and kind of read through there to understand financial status of non-for-profits. And they do also, I give them a lot of credit for looking at the letters of support and commitment and really reading between the lines for those. So those really do matter when applications come in. Okay, next slide. Any questions? Okay, I hope the information is helpful. Okay, so this slide is kind of what do we look for in a research project? These are kind of things a lot of times that we'll give back feedback on for letters of inquiry that come in. For research, again, we're looking at research that is generalizable, that's applied research, that has an actionable plan on how findings will be applied to current practice. Another common saying of our trustees is they don't want to fund something to be published in a book and to sit on a shelf. So they're really looking for actionable outcomes of the work. Oftentimes when projects are completed, the trustees will ask us, like the two main questions are, okay, so that project's finished, so what and what's next? They want to know the very practical implications of what's happening because of the work that they funded. They want to see work go beyond program evaluation. Again, that's getting kind of into the generalizability of the work. They also want to see why you're coming to RRF Foundation for Aging for funding and recognize that there are not easy, but there are other opportunities for funding, and where can RRF really fit into the niche and support the field to advance. So if something looks like it's streamlined for federal funding, and often we'll struggle to get through our process. This is where, like what I said on the last slide, we want to see substantial detail on the study methods. We have one trustee, every single study that he reviews, he says, how's this being disseminated? He feels nothing is really, and I think rightfully so, feels that nothing's going to go anywhere if there's not a strong dissemination plan. So how are these findings going to be picked up and used and shared by the team who's actually doing the work? And then certainly, like I said, one of our goals was around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so how is that incorporated into the work? The next slide, I told you I would get to impact a little bit. So this is about impact. As I mentioned earlier, impact is one of our foundation's core values. And we say we are looking to invest in effective organizations, sound program models, and strong policies. RRF for ourselves have defined impact as a project that has a profound, positive, enduring effect on large numbers of older adults. And certainly that large numbers of older adults, we recognize that if we have projects going on in diverse populations, in areas that haven't done much in the aging space, then that might be a large number of older adults proportionately, right? That might be reflective of the specific population that we're targeting, and recognize not every project is going to have the potential to meet hundreds or thousands of people. So we've done a lot to look at how do we find work that has the potential for high impact. And if you go to the next slide, this goes through, I think a lot of these things that make your application stand out are things that we've seen that really lead to impact. And I think it's kind of cool from the position that I'm sitting in, where I've seen and I'm hearing about, I haven't been at the foundation long enough, but my colleagues, I have a colleague who's been at the foundation now, I think 25 or 30 years, who has really seen projects that continue to have huge impacts in the field. And we spend a lot of time going back to those. What do they have in common? What are the things that they did well that really led to what we consider significant impact? When we're saying it in our lay terms, wow, that was so impactful for the field. What does that mean? And what do some of these projects have in common? And these are some of the things that we've pulled out and have identified that have really led to success in other projects. So having really strong partnerships, and not just the kind for show or the kind that are done for a specific project, but really partnerships that are meaningful and have lasted. Certainly we fund things that do have new partnerships as well, but there needs to be mutual understanding in that space. And there needs to be clear conversation among the partners around, I always talk about like a give-get grid, right? There needs to be transparency around what is each partner giving and getting out of the partnership for it to really kind of prosper. Strong DEI lens and impact. So we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion through these kind of two perspectives. So looking at the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, meaning was the project created? Was it initiated? Was it originated with this lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or was it laid on top of that? Similarly, community engagement is going to help your application stand out. Strong stakeholder voice. Are the right stakeholders involved, and are they involved in the right way? Is there adequate compensation for stakeholders? This is to where we kind of participant incentives, right? We want to see compensation. We know if you're partnering with a researcher, you're not going to incentivize them to do the work. You're going to compensate them for the work that they want to do. So we're really looking for kind of that transition to understand that we are compensating people to participate at various levels in our project. We're looking for appropriate budgets and timelines. I know with a lot of foundations, they want to see the budget get down. Similarly, we can't fund huge budgets, but at the same time, seeing a huge project submitted with a small budget tends to be concerning to our trustees as well. And projects that have innovative work that clearly fills a gap in the field are often going to lead to success. Okay, next slide. This is just some information on what we're looking for in evaluation. And actually, for our research proposals, we don't even use the word evaluation. We're looking for data analysis. We're looking for all of the methods related to data collection. But also we could talk about it as evaluation, and especially in direct service projects. we are not, especially in direct service projects or model projects, we want to see evaluation that's meaningful to the organization. One of the things that we're really focused on, along with trust-based philanthropy, is we don't want to bog our partners down running numbers to get to us if it's not going to be valuable to them. We have found, though, that having a required evaluation in all work, and required, I kind of say lightly, but encouraging partners to do an evaluation has been helpful to them and to us, to give to our trustees, but to them also to help to show to others, to share with others, and to have the information. So we often look for evaluations that include both formative and summative components. So we're looking at the process as well as the outcomes. And we very much believe that not you can't have a one-size-fits-all evaluation, that there are different ways to look at programs and to evaluate them. A couple of years ago, when I was teaching a class on evaluation, and I would have the students work with community partners who are kind of in a bind in evaluation. And there was one community partner working with the immigrant population here in Chicago. They did not speak English, so they didn't want to give any contact information. They didn't speak English. And I remember there was another thing that really led to a challenge for evaluation, right? Because we can't follow up. We don't have, there were a handful of challenges, but I loved being able to see what the students came up with in terms of creative evaluation and really thinking through, how do we work to understand if this program is beneficial or not? And they've kind of done things like, you know, okay, if we're on a Zoom, can we do a thumbs up, thumbs down, at least getting some sort of feedback that's going to be helpful? How do we prioritize what's most important in the program? So I like being able to look at what's needed for that program and what can be best for it. One other thing that I want to say about evaluation, when I was back a long time ago, before I was in philanthropy, I had the opportunity to attend a Grant Makers in Aging conference. This is the professional organization for foundations and philanthropists focusing in aging. And I was kind of surprised all of the information they had on evaluation. I guess it hadn't occurred to me the reason for the foundations needing to understand how to do evaluation. But I thought that was so helpful to me as I went through my career and tried to write my own grants, to understand why it's important for the foundations you're working with to have evaluation information, and how I could work to get them information that they could give to their trustees to help their trustees see the impact they're having, that won't bog me down simultaneously. Let me see if there's anything else I want to pick up on. The fourth point here, measures and methods will be appropriate to the setting and target population and will appropriately conceptualize the outcome of interest. I'm going to talk about this on the next slide. If we could jump to the next slide. This is something that we often get applications where they talk about an outcome they want to measure, and then they're not measuring that outcome. So this is just something to think through. This is just an example I quickly threw together, so please don't focus on the language here. After looking at it, I was kind of like, oh, did I get everything right here? So this is just an example to show you the conceptualization of outcomes that we're interested in. So this diagram here is showing, you know, someone writes an application and says, we're going to improve social well-being. And then it's really, and I know this crowd all knows this social isolation and loneliness are distinct but related multidimensional constructs, right? That's something that we see and we hear about in every presentation. I think what we don't always do is then translate that into how we're going to set up measures and how we're going to understand if our programs are working. So how do we take that broad concept of social well-being, define it into the constructs that kind of make up that term? So here I have it laid out as social well-being can be defined as isolation, loneliness, community, belonging, or a combination of that. And then how do we measure those terms? right? So isolation can be measured by number of social contacts, number of social interactions with others, or objective support a person is receiving. So the point here is just making sure that we are measuring what we want to be measuring and what our program is designed to impact. There are a couple of, and I'm sure most of you are, there's a handful of validated measures for social isolation and loneliness, and some that are used more frequently than others. But it's really important to understand which construct related to well-being those were designed for, and whether or not the work you're doing will impact the construct that you're measuring. Let me think, was there something else? Oh, and then the other thing that I was going to add on is the difference between using validated measures and non-validated measures. So when I used to be a director of research at a community-based organization, and I'm someone who came from academia, and my background was all about, I actually worked measurement development. How do you measure subjective concepts and constructs? And I went into that community-based organization, and they wanted to do measurement, and they said, we want to know if our programs are having impact and outcomes. And I said, great, I've got this slew of 36 item surveys, and we'll implement this and we'll implement that. And of course, we all know the story. They gave me funny looks and said, no, we were thinking you would ask us 2 items. So I think, you know, clear recognition that we can't always use validated measures, but where possible and depending on the level of rigidity that you're looking for to understand about your program, and even where in development your program is. Are you looking to see if it's making a difference? Are you looking to test the program? What are you looking for is going to dictate whether or not what kind of type of survey or assessment we'll be doing. And then I just have one more similar slide, again, looking at the multidimensionality of social isolation and loneliness. Again, recognizing that the root causes of isolation and loneliness are multifaceted. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, and it's really important to define this and understand what it is that the program is targeting. And all, when we're measuring things, making sure that our measures will be sensitive to change. You know, if we're starting with a group of people who are not isolated and lonely at the beginning, we might not expect to see changes in the measures that we're using. So that's just a little bit on measurement and evaluation. Any questions? Okay, great. Then I'm gonna hop into the next slide and tell you a little bit about how we as a foundation view social and intergenerational connectedness. Like I said earlier, this is one of our 4 priority areas. And this area came about, our trustees came out with their strategic plan in January of 2020. So they worked to define these priority areas, basically 2018, 2019. I wasn't at the foundation at the time. I came in 2019, and they said, you know, here's this area that we want you to be able to work with. Social and intergenerational connectedness. And I was actually super excited about this and thinking this is an area that maybe besides Carla, not very many people are working on right now. And I was kind of thinking I got my work cut out for me to draw attention to this space and bring in more researchers and really talk about why this is such an important area to study. And then, as we all know the story, said, gosh, if only a pandemic were about to hit that isolated everyone, and then they would recognize the importance and my job would be easier. But I didn't, but it happened. And as you all know, then the trajectory of what was going on in this space changed so quickly. And I was really glad. I think we were very fortunate at RF that we had already said this is a space that we want to be working in. And it's really been exciting to see where the field has gone in this space. So we're looking at strengthening social bonds through meaningful efforts that promote meaningful social connections, including those that span the generations. If you go to the next slide, you'll see these are kind of the buckets that we look for, the strategies for a greater connection within this area. So we look at programs that build on existing programs and services. For example, if there's a Meals on Wheels program, or if there are exercise programs, how can we build on existing successful programs to incorporate elements to reduce isolation and loneliness? We're looking at using technology as a tool for connection. We're really interested in leveraging technology. We know people are using it. We know it's here that, and it's a tool that could help us. And so how do we really leverage that and use it to the issues and concerns that we're dealing with? The third bucket is promoting meaningful engagement. So how do we expand meaning and engagement in programs? And then the fourth is creating social bonds across the generations. And that's where we see a lot of our intergenerational programs come in that are working to reduce isolation and loneliness. The next slide has a couple of the projects that I just wanted to share with you, that these are some of the ones that we've been very excited about. So the first one is we funded, I think in 2021, the Wisconsin Institute for Healthy Aging. They are working on a statewide coalition to end isolation and loneliness. So with RRF funding, they've actually been working closely with the governor's office and recently got a funded position within the department for someone to be able to maintain this work post RRF funding. And they're really working across the state. They now have an annual day dedicated to social isolation and loneliness. They're working with University of Wisconsin at Madison to help create an assessment that they're sharing across the state to be used at AAAs and community-based organizations. And they recently ran a pilot program to use the assessment and then highlight a specific program that that organization has and look at where it could be effective in preventing and reducing isolation and loneliness. So I think they've been doing really exciting stuff around the state. Similarly, we did fund something in Illinois through Illinois Aging Services, where we looked at the Illinois Aging Services looked at all of the AAAs across the state and a handful of community-based organizations to understand if and how they're assessing and understanding isolation and loneliness. And now they're working as a state to start understanding, we don't have like a referral network. We don't have evidence-based programs like we do in physical activity. So how do we manage that and understand that when it comes up? So they're continuing to work at this point. The state institute, the Illinois Public Health Institute, is working to break down the silos between aging and public health so they could address this, this issue together. Another exciting one that we're funding, this one is almost done. As I was looking through my materials, I was hoping that I would actually get in a final report to understand how the outcomes came in. This is Florida State University. They're working to adapt and pilot test a brief focused mechanism of change-based cognitive behavioral intervention designed to reduce the adverse effects of loneliness for older adults. This is out of their Department of Psychology. And early on in this project, they got a lot of great publicity, a lot of excitement and enthusiasm. The PI also does work around anxiety of older adults, so really brought that element in. Day. And then another one I wanted to highlight, this one at Dartmouth University. The PI, I didn't include it here. Her name is Renee Pepin. And she's looking at a brief behavioral activation program that she's implemented on top of Meals on Wheels. So she's really using an implementation sciences approach to work with Meals on Wheels and other community-based organizations for when they are to implement an assessment and then be able to implement this behavioral activation program that really helps older adults understand how to change their behavior and become more socially active. This is, I feel like I always see this kind of as where physical activity used to be a while back, where we all know physical activity is important, but we didn't necessarily do that. I feel social isolation and loneliness is similar. We're all hearing the importance of being socially active, but how do we change behaviors to really pick up those activities and stick with them? So that's what Dr. Pepin is looking at Dartmouth. Next slide. So these are some questions that have come up in this area that we want to continue to look at and explore. So related to this behavioral activation, are there modifiable behaviors that can prevent or reduce loneliness? Are these behaviors consistent across populations and situations? How can older people increase their sense of self-efficacy to address loneliness in the face of isolation? This is a big one. That do people understand their ability to change their situation? Of the array of new programs to address loneliness and isolation, which are the most feasible and effective? Which ones can be implemented in a community? And which ones are really working to reduce isolation and loneliness or to prevent it? Are these programs accessible to a variety of populations? And how do we match the right person to the right program? How do we measure success of these programs? This is something else that we've just seen a huge increase in focus and understanding of measurement of social isolation and loneliness. And how do we make impact at a societal and systems level? Again, thinking through physical activity, right? I think a lot of that didn't necessarily change until we recognized it as a societal issue and really started changing our roads so people can ride their bikes more regularly and getting out and doing more activities. How do we change our systems to really understand that this is a societal issue? And we need to change the way we're viewing social activities. Okay, so that is what I have on social isolation and loneliness. I do want to talk a little bit about our other priority areas. Again, I'll wait for just a minute if there are any questions though before I move on. Okay, so if you want to jump into the next slide. So caregiving is an area, so in our caregiving priority area, we want to ensure that care partners are informed, well-trained, and supported as they care for older people in community settings. We all know, and actually you could jump to the next slide. I have an extra slide for this one too. We all know the numbers are surprising. The amount of people, I think like Helen Carter once said, what is it? There are three types of people: those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who need caregivers. All of us are touched by caregivers in one way or another. And it's a kind of a fascinating role that I've been really glad to see become more elevated over the past couple of years. And this recognition that people who are caregivers actually have a shortened life expectancy because of the needs put on them and because of the stress and what they're going through. So we fund in this space, but we specifically, I think this differentiates us a little bit. We're specifically looking at outcomes of the caregivers themselves. So we're not looking at if we do this where the caregiver does the person's quality of life improve, but really what are the outcomes and that are most relevant to the caregiver themselves, and how do we impact the outcomes for the caregiver and really put them front and center in the work. Our next priority area is economic security in later life. RRF says we envision a future in which all of us as we age have the means to achieve a secure and dignified later life, sufficient income to meet basic expenses, assistance if needed, to plan and manage our income and savings effectively, and a stable, equitable public and private system of support, services, and protections that can help us achieve and maintain economic well-being. A lot of our priorities areas too, if you've noticed, are kind of overlapping. So economic security really gets into so many issues related to so many social drivers of health. The two areas that we kind of focus on here are building financial knowledge and skills and advocating for a stable, equitable retirement system. We fund a lot of policy work in this space and have seen a lot of progress there, a lot of exciting things happening. And then our last priority area is housing. And with this one, we're looking to promote safe and supportive housing. We're looking to address inequities and prevent homelessness. And we're looking to enable affordable housing. This is an area that has been surprising. We've done a lot around homeless older adults, which probably very different in California, but here in Illinois wasn't recognized at all as a issue related to aging. So for example, we wanted to attend the homelessness funders community, and they kind of said, well, what are you doing here? You focus on aging. And we said, yes, exactly. And have kind of made our space for ourselves there, and really brought attention to the fact that very large percent of homeless people are in fact older adults. So that is our other priority areas. The one other thing that I was asked to touch on is finding other funders in this space. So just tacked on this information. I always like to give this out when people are asking me about who else funds in aging, funds in this space. My go-to is Grantmakers in Aging. If you take a look at their website, you could look at who are their members and get a sense of some of the organizations and foundations and companies now that are funding in this space. Just in the past year, they've hugely grown their membership. And so many foundations that you wouldn't necessarily think of are now starting to emphasize the need to fund in this area. So you could take a look at that. Similarly, Grantmakers in Health. I always like to look and review their list of kind of who are members, what are the areas they're focusing in. I believe there's a paid membership for, but I believe they have a lot of great resources and information for nonprofits of all types, and it's just a great resource to have.
Hi, good afternoon, guys.
And that is everything that I have. So I'm open to any questions.
Thank you so much. And as you all know, Dr. Eisenstein is truly a wealth of information in this space and has really graciously donated her time to be here. So I truly, definitely encourage you all to spend this next time. We have allotted time for Q&A. So we have about 15-20 minutes. If people have any questions, I know I have some questions, but wanted to open it up to the floor. Well, I guess I can get us started to kick us off. And thank you again, Amy, for taking the time to be here. You were mentioning really having an emphasis on dissemination plans. As you know, the findings shouldn't just sit on paper or among us. What are some really successful dissemination plans that you've seen, especially when community organizations are applying for grants?
Yeah, a lot of the strong dissemination. So it's going to depend on who it's coming from. If a community organization is a single organization that's applying for a grant, that's one of the areas that when we see strong partnerships, strong success in presenting their projects in a variety of kind of places is beneficial. Certainly as the organizations get bigger, looking for partnerships with some of the national organizations will really help with dissemination. I know US Aging has been invaluable to some of our partners. SAGE also has been a great partner to help with national dissemination. So really that's going to get into some of that partnership building. One of the other things that we often look for in dissemination is going beyond an academic journal or a manuscript. Our materials created for the community, you know, by the community and for the community to help get word out. And what steps are organizations going to take beyond, oh, I sent it out to 100 people and now I'm done. But is there opportunity, is there thought for how they're going to continue to partner with those? You know, some of the programs will actually have a phase of technical assistance where then they're going to work with 5 other organizations to help them implement the program. So kind of what's going on, having something go on beyond just, I'm going to create a document and put it out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Another thing, you're welcome. If people don't want to ask questions now, I'll put my email address. And certainly if you want to share the PDF that I sent you, feel free to do that. And people are welcome to get in touch with me. Like I said, I know this was a lot of RRF specific. That's what I know. That's what I could speak to. But we do also internally try to get out and talk with as many partners as we can, so that, like I said, hopefully the things that I talked about will ring bells or spur conversations with other funders as well.
Yeah, and I actually have one more coalition specific question. You know, as you can see, we're in a space where we're bringing together lots of different organizations who live in a similar geographic area, do a lot of overlapping work. You're speaking on the emphasis and importance of partnerships when people are applying, and you know, you're saying the trustees really read letters of support. Do you have any advice for our coalition members on either what types of partnerships they can be looking for when creating projects, or ways that they can even, you know, use the coalition to start thinking about that?
Yeah, you know, I think having programs that aren't kept to a single organization is going to really help us make an impact in the field and really help us move these things forward, especially if we want to test a program. It's not going to be beneficial if it just works in one specific center. Like, are there ways that you could partner together and both implement something similar, where then you're sharing best practices? I think a coalition like this is beautiful for that purpose of what have we done? What have we done that worked well? What have we done that hasn't worked so well? And figuring out, maybe it didn't work well here for this reason or that reason. Any way that you could leverage the knowledge from each other to really help build the field. So as a funder, we're looking for programs that can benefit the field. How do, like, right, our goal is to reduce social isolation and loneliness across the country. So if there are ways to partner together to obtain that, that's really ultimately kind of, what do people call it, like the big hairy audacious goal? Like, how do we, not saying we're going to get there, but how do we take steps to get there? And I see the question about beyond Illinois, where else have we funded? We are a national funder, so we fund all over the country. That being said, our direct service is the most restricted. Our direct service work, so a program at a community organization, that we only fund in Illinois. We do sometimes fund some model projects that are looking to understand efficacy beyond just an individual program. So if there are large partnerships where something is being conducted in multiple states across the country, that's a time that we have, and it also includes an element of research. That's a time we've been able to fund kind of direct service work outside of Illinois. Otherwise, we mostly fund research nationally. We fund advocacy nationally. We won't fund local advocacy, but we'll fund national advocacy. And similarly, training and development, as long as it is generalizable for the entire population, we can fund that nationally. I love your idea to have a discussion amongst the coalition on how to measure program impact, right? And also like the more data that we're able to get that is similar, I think the better, that we're able to understand what our programs are doing, how they're impacting things. We're able to look at it in a similar perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions right now? Don't want to put anyone on the spot, but we can also, obviously, as Amy very nicely suggested, follow up. I can send her some questions on behalf as well. I saw Jessica just had a question. Do you fund a statewide advocacy effort that is not in Illinois?
Not a local state one. If there's like advocacy that would benefit California, that would not be federal. That is not something that we would fund. I will say we have done that in the past where there has been, I think this happened recently, where there was an effort that California was being used as a model to then that same type of policy work being translated into different states where in that
Sorry,
space.
Amy, I think you broke up a little bit just there. If you could go back a sentence. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so we have funded advocacy work in California where they were being done as the model project to understand the methods that they went about to push the advocacy work forward, and then had strong plans in place to disseminate that effort into other states.
So one more follow-up question on advocacy. And first of all, thank you. This has been incredibly helpful. When you talk advocacy, are you talking things mostly at a policy level? If it's something where we are working to teach older adults to advocate for themselves around certain issues, for instance, hospital discharge or something, is that something where there might be some flexibility because it's not necessarily going to be about changing a specific policy? It's helping people navigate some of what's there and then identify issues that might be bigger.
Yep. For advocacy, we're pretty, excuse me, we're pretty broad in our definition. So we've definitely, especially in the caregiver space, we've done a lot of work how to train caregivers to advocate. So really a variety of efforts that can go into that space. I will say also, we just updated, if you look at our website, and again, I hope this could be helpful with other foundations, but if you look at our website under the advocacy pathway, and I believe you have to go to kind of what we look for in a full proposal, it highlights a bunch of questions that I think really help you think about what's needed in that space and what we're looking at. So if you want kind of more details, I would go, it's kind of tricky to find, but if you go into, it's either letter of inquiry or full application, and you'll see a whole bunch of questions.
Great, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions at this time for Amy? All right, well, if not, and feel free as we wrap up to ask any questions in the chat or unmute. We still have about like 10-ish minutes. But thank you so much, Amy, again, for taking the time to be here. We truly appreciate it. And for everyone here, I'll be sending out a recording with the slides and all the resources that were mentioned throughout the presentation so that you have access to all of that. We truly appreciate it. And, you know, we learned so much about RRF, and thank you for sharing light on your organization and what you're looking to fund, and as it can relate to so many foundations and organizations throughout the country, California, et cetera. So thank you again. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and thank you all for the work that you're doing. I wish we were funding more in California. It really sounds like you've got some exciting stuff going on, and hopefully we'll have opportunities for Illinois to learn from some of this as well. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday and week. And I'll be in touch soon. Thank you.